I'm Jami Floyd, and welcome to TED Talks in NYC, the series that brings TED.com's celebrated conversations to television and keeps the conversation going with some of the brightest minds in New York City. Fact, 9 million Americans identify themselves as 2 or more races in the 2010 census. That's what this week's show is all about, multiracial identity. And New York is certainly a melting pot of ethnicity. For many of us, it raises interesting questions like, who am I? And where do I fit in? Actress Thandiwe Newton is familiar with these struggles. Here she is sharing her own story in this 2011 TED Global Talk.
Embracing otherness. When I first heard this theme, I thought, well, embracing otherness is embracing myself. And the journey to that place of understanding and acceptance has been an interesting one for me. And it's given me an insight into the whole notion of self, which I think is worth sharing with you today. We each have a self, but I don't think that we're born with one. You know how newborn babies believe they're part of everything? They're not separate. Well, that fundamental sense of oneness is lost on us very quickly. It's like that initial stage is over. Oneness, infancy, unformed, primitive. It's no longer valid or real. What is real is separateness. And at some point in early babyhood, the idea of self starts to form. Our little portion of oneness is given a name, is told all kinds of things about itself. And these details, opinions, and ideas become facts, which go towards building ourselves, our identity. And that self becomes the vehicle for navigating our social world. But the self is a projection based on other people's projections. Is it who we really are, or who we really want to be, or should be? So this whole interaction with self and identity was a very difficult one for me growing up. The self that I attempted to take out into the world was rejected over and over again. And my panic at not having a self that fit, and the confusion that came from myself being rejected, created anxiety, shame, and hopelessness, which kind of defined me for a long time. But in retrospect, the destruction of myself was so repetitive that I started to see a pattern. The self changed, got affected, broken, destroyed, but another one would evolve. Sometimes stronger, sometimes hateful, sometimes not wanting to be there at all. The self was not constant. And how many times would myself have to die before I realized that it was never alive in the first place? I grew up on the coast of England in the 70s. My dad is white from Cornwall, and my mum is black from Zimbabwe. Even the idea of us as a family was challenging to most people. But nature had its wicked way, and brown babies were born. But from about the age of 5, I was aware that I didn't fit. I was the black atheist kid in the all-white Catholic school run by nuns. I was an anomaly. And myself was rooting around for definition, trying to plug in. Because the self likes to fit, to see itself replicated, to belong. That confirms its existence and its importance. And it is important. It has an extremely important function. Without it, we literally can't interface with others. We can't hatch plans and climb that stairway of popularity, of success. But my skin color wasn't right. My hair wasn't right. My history wasn't right. Myself became defined by otherness, which meant that in that social world, I didn't really exist. And I was other before being anything else, even before being a girl. I was a noticeable nobody. Another world was opening up around this time, performance and dancing. That nagging dread of selfhood didn't exist when I was dancing. I'd literally lose myself. And I was a really good dancer. I would put all my emotional expression into my dancing. I could be in the movement in a way that I wasn't able to be in my real life, in myself. And at 16, I stumbled across another opportunity, and I earned my first acting role in a film. I can hardly find the words to describe the peace I felt when I was acting. My dysfunctional self could actually plug in to another self, not my own, and it felt so good. It was the first time that I existed inside a fully functioning self, one that I controlled, that I steered, that I gave life to. But the shooting day would end, and I'd return to my gnarly, awkward self. By 19, I was a fully fledged movie actor, but still searching for definition. I applied to read anthropology at university. Dr. Phyllis Lee gave me my interview, and she asked me, how would you define race? Well, I thought I had the answer to that one. And I said, skin color. So biology, genetics, she said. Because, Thandie, that's not accurate, because there's actually more genetic difference between a black Kenyan and a black Ugandan than there is between a black Kenyan and, say, a white Norwegian. Because we all stem from Africa, so in Africa, there's been more time to create genetic diversity. In other words, race has no basis in biological or scientific fact. On the one hand, result, right? On the other hand, my definition of self just lost a huge chunk of its credibility. But what was credible, what is biological and scientific fact, is that we all stem from Africa. In fact, from a woman called mitochondrial Eve, who lived 160,000 years ago. And race is an illegitimate concept which ourselves have created based on fear and ignorance. Strangely, these revelations didn't cure my low self-esteem. That feeling of otherness, my desire to disappear, was still very powerful. I had a degree from Cambridge. I had a thriving career, but my self was a car crash. And I wound up with bulimia and on a therapist's couch. And of course I did. I still believed myself was all I was. I still valued self-worth above all other worth. And what was there to suggest otherwise? We've created entire value systems and a physical reality to support the worth of self. Look at the industry for self-image and the jobs it creates, the revenue it turns over. We'd be right in assuming that the self is an actual living thing, but it's not. It's a projection which our clever brains create in order to cheat ourselves from the reality of death. But there is something that can give the self ultimate and infinite connection. And that thing is oneness, our essence. The self's struggle for authenticity and definition will never end unless it's connected to its creator, to you and to me. And that can happen with awareness. Awareness of the reality of oneness and the projection of selfhood. For a start, we can think about all the times when we do lose ourselves. It happens when I dance, when I'm acting. I'm earthed in my essence, and myself is suspended. In those moments, I'm connected to everything: the ground, the air, the sounds, the energy from the audience. All my senses are alert and alive, in much the same way as an infant might feel, that feeling of oneness. And when I'm acting a role, I inhabit another self, and I give it life for a while. Because when the self is suspended, so is divisiveness and judgment. And I've played everything from vengeful ghost in the time of slavery to Secretary of State in 2004. And no matter how other these selves might be, they're all related in me. And I honestly believe the key to my success as an actor and my progress as a person has been the very lack of self that used to make me feel so anxious and insecure. I always wondered why I could feel others' pain so deeply, why I could recognize the somebody in the nobody. It's because I didn't have a self to get in the way. I thought I lacked substance. And the fact that I could feel others meant that I had nothing of myself to feel. The thing that was a source of shame was actually a source of enlightenment. And when I realized and really understood that myself is a projection and that it has a function, a funny thing happened. I stopped giving it so much authority. I give it its due. I take it to therapy. I've become very familiar with its dysfunctional behavior. But I'm not ashamed of myself. In fact, I respect myself and its function. And over time, and with practice, I've tried to live more and more from my essence. And if you can do that, incredible things happen. I was in Congo in February, dancing and celebrating with women who've survived the destruction of their selves in literally unthinkable ways. Destroyed because other brutalized, psychopathic selves all over that beautiful land are fueling ourselves' addiction to iPods, pads, and bling, which further disconnect ourselves from ever feeling their pain, their suffering, their death. Because, hey, if we're all living in ourselves and mistaking it for life, then we're devaluing and desensitizing life. And in that disconnected state, yeah, we can build factory farms with no windows, destroy marine life, and use rape as a weapon of war. So here's a note to self. The cracks have started to show in our constructed world, and oceans will continue to surge through the cracks, and oil, and blood, rivers of it. Crucially, we haven't been figuring out how to live in oneness with the earth and every other living thing. We've just been insanely trying to figure out how to live with each other, billions of each other. Only we're not living with each other. Our crazy selves are living with each other and perpetuating an epidemic of disconnection. Let's live with each other and take it a breath at a time. If we can get under that heavy self, light a torch of awareness, and find our essence, our connection to the infinite and every other living thing. We knew it from the day we were born. Let's not be freaked out by our bountiful nothingness. It's more a reality than the ones ourselves have created. Imagine what kind of existence we can have if we honor inevitable death of self, appreciate the privilege of life, and marvel at what comes next. Simple awareness is where it begins. Thank you for listening.
Let's continue the conversation with Bonnie St. John, a motivational speaker, Olympics medalist, and author of the upcoming book, How Great Women Lead. And Celeste Headlee, co-host of WNYC Radio's The Takeaway, and Pulitzer Prize nominee, and Symphony Space's artist-in-residence, Eisa Davis. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
So, Eisa, I have to start with you because I know that Thandiwe Newton's TED Talk is on your Facebook page.
Yes,
Why?
yes. Well, someone posted it there knowing that I would get so much out of it, and I did, and I sent it to so many people that I know on my network there. And the thing about that talk that I think is just so brilliant is that she's really talking about otherness and how shame and pain in our childhood actually becomes the thing that makes us the very special, beautiful, strong, talented people that we are in our adulthood when we come into our full bloom. So what I love is that she's really saying that everything that we think is a difference that hurts us is actually our gift, the thing that will inspire all of the people that are in our world. And that's what I think is really beautiful about that talk. And just talking about the self and how it's always a changing thing. You know, there's nothing that's static about identity. I think that's really beautiful.
And this touched you even though your own ethnic background, racial identity, is different from hers.
That's right.
So let's go through really quickly and give a little sense of our own identity. And I'll start with you, Eisa.
Well, I just say I'm black. I'm plain old black. And the thing about blackness is that it's always multiracial. You know, that's what historically it's been,
That's
you know,
right.
is that blackness is something that holds everyone who has a touch of it. And of course, we all stem from Africa originally, so we could say we're all black, you know, in some ways.
Celeste, your sense of identity.
Ethnically, I am black, Jewish, Native American, Buddhist, white, and a bunch of other things. I mean, it just
I'm
gets
glad
too...
we have you here today.
You know, I identify myself most culturally with African American because that's the culture we were very often brought up in. Because if you have a black person in your family in the 1950s, you are black, period. And our Jewish family had kind of disowned us. And I take a lot of criticism now for trying to be black when I'm not actually black. And yet I think, you know, 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, you would have been criticizing me for trying to pass. So which is it?
Oh, the same folks who were criticizing.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right,
Yeah,
I want to come
absolutely.
back to that important point. But first, let me come over to Bonnie. Bonnie, your sense of yourself.
As you were saying, growing up, I was black because no matter what small percentage you are, you're black. And I think it's interesting nowadays, though, you're so much freer to define yourself as multiracial. And my daughter, who's also multiracial, defines herself in a more complicated way. So I'm getting used to saying, you know, that I'm biracial. My father is very white. My mother was very dark black, and my great-grandmother was Indian. And my mother converted to Judaism. So I have that complexity. You're more able to embrace it today than you were when I was growing up.
And I like the fact that you use the word complexity. And I will say, just to join the conversation, that I'm Native American, African American, and Caucasian. Biracial is a new word, or multiracial, new words for me as well. Those are relatively modern words. We didn't have those when I was growing up. If you were black, you were black. If you were part black, you were black. You didn't have the choices that people have now. But it's good, I think, that they have those choices. I want to ask you, I see, Bonnie, you're trying to jump in.
Well, just to say that there was even a sense of, if you tried to do that 20 years ago, to say you were biracial, it was you were insulting your black heritage.
Absolutely.
So you
Yes.
didn't
That's
want
right.
to do that.
The New York Times recently published a front page piece about the growing population of multiracial Americans, but still challenges they face as they try to define themselves, especially when one member of the family looks white and another member of the family looks black, even if they are siblings. Is this surprising, disappointing, or in some way does this invigorate you in this debate? Let's go this way, Bonnie.
One of the things for me that's surprising is my white family really still rejects me. I had a conversation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art a few years ago with my uncle, my father's brother, who said having black people in my family is like being gay and I don't want to be outed. You know, how many groups can you insult in one sentence?
Still, Bonnie.
And so even
Still, this is a
today-
recent conversation.
This is a recent, and I thought, you know, once I became a Rhodes Scholar and won Olympic medals, they might like me. But no, they really we still don't. And he told me not to, get in touch with his children. Please do not get in touch with my children because we've never told them you exist. And so it's, and I feel the pain even as you say it. So it's not gone. People who think we have a black president who's biracial, it's all hunky-dory now. I'm sorry to tell you, even here in New York City.
There's more genes that control whether or not you can roll your tongue than control the color of your skin.
Thank you for having the courage to do
that. And that was Thandie's point in the talk as well.
That was her point. And, but the thing for me is, like, to ask if there's racism, I have to tell you that, honestly, as somebody who looks maybe Puerto Rican instead of African American, I hear more racist things and more hurtful things.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. People must say things in your presence that they would not say in...
I think the reason why we still have racism today is because we're not honest about it with each other. People aren't honest with white folks, and they're not honest among black folks. I mean, there's a lot of prejudice on the African American community. There's a lot of prejudice in the Latino community, and there is a great deal of prejudice in the Native American community.
Of people against each other. I just want to clarify that it's not even black people being racist against white people. It's black people being racist against themselves.
Eating each other alive. What it is to be black. What if you go skydiving, that's not black. That's not a black activity.
But then at the same time, I think it's very important to distinguish between terms. So there's racism, which actually is a systematic, that's like who's in our prisons. Right. There are people of color in our prisons, and they're poor, right? So it's class as well.
16% unemployment rate for blacks,
So there's racism, and then there's prejudice and bias. So that means, like, if you are an underprivileged person by race or by class, you can very well be prejudiced against a white person who is oppressing you, right? But so that means we all can dabble in prejudice if we like, and we all do. I mean, it's a human affair, really.
Yeah, and when we talked about Jim Crow, we now always talk about Jim Crow in terms of black people, but it affected poor white people.
That's right.
In great proportions, and we don't talk about it in those terms anymore. But it was a system of caste oppression, as much about class as it was about.
You're talking about implicit bias as well, right? Yes. So that we have the racism, we have outright systems of bias, but today there's so much otherness that comes out in unconscious ways.
That's right. But Bonnie, I want to ask you, speaking of otherness, let's talk a little bit about your obstacles in being both multiracial and an amputee. Something we talked about, I've talked with you about your challenges as an amputee in other contexts, but I want to talk with you about having a definition of yourself that goes beyond just the race issue.
I struggled with Thandie's talk a little bit when she was talking about the oneness and the not seeing otherness and not having a self, and I thought, well, for me, celebrating my prosthesis and just wearing the medal and letting it show, is that like super selfness, in that context? And I think I came to it of thinking it's great to have the oneness, but that doesn't mean we lose the differences. Oneness that Thandie talks about, I think it's really important for people to understand, I'm sure she gets this too, is that it doesn't mean, oh, let's just not see color and we'll all get along.
And we all do look differently, and the thing is that we want to be able to celebrate that and make sure that there's never, ever, ever a reason for someone to not get a job or always be poor because of their skin color or because of their gender or because of their disability.
This is a question I always want to ask in this context about President Obama, who is mixed, but we all speak about the first black president.
I don't.
Celeste, you don't.
I do not.
But the rest of us do.
I know. And
but why do we do this? Is it because we are so impressed with ourselves as a country that we elected the first black president?
That.
Is it because he chooses to define himself as the first black president? Or does he, in private, perhaps define himself as multiracial, but he's been sort of forced into this box?
I don't know. He plays basketball, so he's clearly black. Kidding. That's a complete joke. But, here's the thing for me is like, and I've had this discussion before, is that, if he wants to define himself as a black president, that's absolutely fine.
And of course, he did come up. He's almost 50. I think, is he 50 yet? I mean,
he just had his
50th. So he did come up in the era where there were not as many choices about how you defined yourself. If you were a dark-skinned, multiracial person, you called yourself black.
But he is half white, and his white family deserves the honor of having raised this man, this, intelligent, honorable man who became the leader of the free world. They deserve the honor and the recognition for doing that, just as much as the other half of his family does. And when we refuse to acknowledge the multiracial experience that he had, we're not acknowledging what makes America so beautiful and so strong, which is our multiracial culture.
Right, multicultural fabric.
Absolutely, and when it works really well. And when it doesn't, it really doesn't. And I had that pain. I mean, I went through that all the time. I didn't fit in anywhere. Because I fit in everywhere, I didn't fit in anywhere. I was not accepted by the Jewish community. I wasn't accepted by the African American community, for God's sake. But I was the second darkest person in my elementary school, and I got called the N-word. And I punched Jim Larkin in the face because of it.
Jim, I hope you're watching.
You know, and then I joined the Black Student Union when I was at Northern Arizona University, and they looked at me like, where the heck did I get off? And I did not belong there. And here in New York, if I was dating a black guy, I would get the looks of death from African American women. That I was...
You're taking one of our men.
Yeah,
You need
exactly.
a T-shirt that says, I am black.
Yeah.
We should make, hey, that's
Don't
a
make
business
assumptions,
idea.
sister.
Well, you know, my last question, and it is about the solution for ending racism, and we talked about the definition of racism in the beginning, as opposed to prejudice and bigotry, but is there hope for ending racism, and what do you think it is? Eisa, I'm gonna start with you.
Well, I think it has to do with really awareness in the way that Thandie spoke about in her talk, that we have to come to this recognition that race is a construct, and understanding all of the biology behind it, that blackness does have all of this diversity within it, and every single race does, but since we're talking about blackness in particular, and I think if we can continue to recognize that truth, then we can dismantle racism.
Studs Terkel called race the American obsession. Will we ever get beyond the obsession, and how?
I think we're simply not honest with one another. Until we start accepting who we are and accepting all of the various ancestries that went to make each of us who we are, and accepting that, and accepting what that is in others, and being completely honest about it, it's not going to end. I mean, honestly, we just have to call each other out on our humanness and not put up with it.
Have that honest conversation
Absolutely.
we've never had. Bonnie?
I have a slightly different answer,
Please.
which is good. I do a lot of work in corporations on diversity and helping people get along in the workplace. And there's a lot of research out of MIT talking about micro inequities, that it's the little things that are unequal when you have otherness, you know, and it could be a northerner working in a southern company, or it could be disability, it could be sexual
Gender.
orientation, anything. So the answer that they came up with at MIT is micro affirmations, is that we need to actually be actively counteracting what will never end. And so rather than trying to say, let's end all of these differences, let's actively work to affirm in little tiny ways all day long our differences. So if you walk into a room and there's only one man there and all women, go up to him and make him feel welcome and comfortable. Or, you know, if there's a person with a disability, don't try not to offend them. Say hi and, you know, ask them, don't, you know, if I offend you, let me know. So those reaching out and affirming our differences is the only way we're gonna counteract it. We're not gonna cure it.
So it's like we're celebrating our oneness through our differences.
By reaching
And being
out and
honest about
connecting.
Yeah.
Being honest about sometimes I don't know what to say, and
Exactly.
I'm going to offend you.
And recognizing that those differences are, again, temporary and really superficial.
I like it. Affirmation,
Micro
honesty, and we hope temporary differences, celebration of the oneness. Ladies, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Bonnie, Celeste, Eisa, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is our show. We leave you with some thoughts from our other TED Show panelists about what they think we could accomplish if we lived in a world where we all felt connected. Thanks for watching. I'm Jami Floyd. Join me next time for more provocative conversation on TED Talks in NYC.
We could accomplish anything.
Everything.
Harmony. If we lived in a world where we all felt connected, then we would understand the essential humanity of everybody, and there would be no more war.
We want to connect, and sometimes you have to step outside of yourself to create that connection, and then anything is possible.
I don't think we can necessarily connect across the world. We should connect in our communities.
We are all connected, and hopefully there's some social change that'll come out of that.
You can turn around most of the world's problems.
So can you imagine the power of the world all connected? I can't wait.